When Americans think of the FGC, what games come to mind? Street Fighter? Tekken? Guilty Gear? Many fighting games players from the West dream of going to Asia to play their favorite games and get that classic arcade experience. But what happens when you show up and everyone is playing on a cabinet you've never seen before? In Japan, there's one game that is considered to be the king of the FGC, and it's played in pretty much every arcade across the country. However, unless you're from Japan, you've probably never heard of it before. This is Gundam Extreme Versus. So, where do we start? First off, what is a Gundam? Mobile Suit Gundam is a military fiction franchise. Gundam are large mechs that people control and use to fight other Gundam. From games to films to model Gundam anyone can build called Gunpla, Gundam is everywhere, especially in Japan. Gundam Versus, the topic of today's video, is a full-on franchise. Over the years, there have been many different versions released. Rango vs. Zaft, Gundam vs. Gundam, Next, Extreme Versus, Full Boost, Maxi Boost, Maxi Boost On, Into Extreme Versus 2, Cross Boost, and the newest version releasing this year, Overboost. In this video, we'll be covering everything from Extreme Versus onwards. So in the bottom left-hand corner, we'll label what you're looking at and when it was released. So what is Gundam Extreme Versus? Simply put, it's a 2v2 fighter with simple controls, a joystick, and 4 buttons, but with a nuanced neutral game and a variety of unique characters to choose from.
You know, all that emotional subtlety that, could be present in a narrative about humanity and like war? Throw all that out the window. Giant robots moving around, super cool. You have this game that is focused around primarily movement, akin to what you would find in a game like Tekken or like 3D fighters, but even more so based on its movement. Movement is very freeform, it's very fluid, and then at the end of the day, you get this wonderful arena fighter with so many layers of interaction to it, on top of the fact that it is a 2v2 game, that there's just nothing else like it in any other 3D arena fighter I have ever played, and definitely one of the most unique games in the fighting game space.
Probably one of the most difficult things about describing Gundam is just that, yeah, it's kind of its own game. Just the fact that the game is kind of about moving in the 3D space and firing projectiles most of the time, and the way the boost system works. There's tons of elements that really differ the two, but you get a lot of fighting game players who kind of translate over to Gundam.
One of the things that separates Gundam Versus from pretty much any other fighting game is the fact that it's 2v2 and requires you to coordinate with your teammate while also managing your boost gauge. On top of this, each Gundam has its own cost, which determines how powerful it is. Weaker Gundam cost around 1,500, while tankier and more powerful Gundam have around 3,000 cost. Whenever a player dies, that cost amount gets deducted from the team's total health pool, and whichever team's total health pool hits 0 first, loses. Each Gundam has a boost gauge and a burst gauge, similar to meter in traditional fighting games. Managing these gauges is one of the biggest skill curves in the game and is the key factor that separates good players from great ones.
You only have so much boost that you can use. Whenever you land, it means that if you've done a lot of actions, you add more recovery to your landing, which means you are more likely to get punished if you overextend. The more you move without landing, the more likely you are to get punished. Combos in this game do a lot of damage. So in general, it is a combination of knowing how much boost you want to spend in a given situation, and when you're choosing to overextend, do you also know whether or not your partner will be there to cover you for what could be that bad situation.
Starting from the Extreme Versus iteration onwards, they added something called Extreme Burst to the game system. Similar to a fighting game, it's its own meter that you collect from taking damage, dealing damage, and once you have enough of it, you can activate Burst by pressing all 3 buttons, and it's kind of a mode that your suit can enter that powers up your suit.
The game doesn't have any quarter circles or half circle inputs. This frees up your attention rather than perfectly executing tech skill. So most of your time is spent calculating and managing your meters.
The game is 2v2, so at the end of the day, one of the biggest aspects of this game is team play, and that can mean either going 2v1 on certain people, depending on if you you smell blood in the water and you want to go after them, or in general, being able to stick together, being able to separate people. And again, it's a dynamic you don't see in a lot of traditional fighting games.
Since it's 2v2, winning is a lot more exciting, and there's nothing quite like popping off with your best friend in a jam-packed Japanese arcade. Gundam Extreme Versus is more popular in Japan than you probably realize. Hundreds of thousands of people build Gunpla, the model figurines for Gundam. Bandai Namco has built true-to-life Gundams across the country, and Gundam Extreme Versus dominates Japanese arcades. Many arcades have reopened after the pandemic forced them to close, and players are coming back in full force. The arcade is the only place to play Gundam Extreme Versus 2 Cross Boost. Entering any arcade in Japan, you'll find that Gundam cabinets outnumber other games in the arcade by a pretty large ratio. Gundam Extreme Versus is so popular in Japan that arcades have its own sponsored tournament called the Premium Dogfight, where players compete in regional tournaments all around Japan in order to earn the chance to go to Premium Dogfight in Tokyo and win it all.
So Premium Dogfight is basically the national tournament for Gundam in Japan. It's sponsored and run by Bandai Namco, so it's like the official tournament. It generally happens every 1 or 2 years, and it is a tournament that everyone really looks forward to in Japan. It's definitely the most prestigious tournament to win. They have talent. It's a big spectacle. They have like a stage and everything, and they've got presenters in the stream. It's really cool, and they've been doing this for quite some time now, at least since the Extreme Versus Vanilla released on PS3. To get into the final tournament bracket, you need to win in area qualifiers. Across Japan, in certain arcades, they will run smaller tournaments. If you win that tournament, then you win a ticket into the main bracket, and then you travel to, on the day of PDF. So it's like a whole season where there will be 64 teams typically that play. So that's 128 players on one day to get down to your grand final. So it's really cool. It's streamed live. I really recommend people watch it if they've never watched it. It's a lot of fun, and it's a big event. And even as foreigners over here in America, we'll watch it and pay a lot of close attention, and it's just always an interesting event.
Gundam Versus is the #1 arcade game right now. In some arcades, there are literal floors with only Gundam cabinets. To say the least, Bandai Namco is making a lot of money off the Gundam IP in Japan. So Gundam Extreme Versus is insanely popular. But what about in other parts of the world? In Hong Kong, basically next door to Japan, there's a dedicated fanbase of people crazy about all things Gundam. Because of this, you'd expect Gundam Extreme Versus 2 to be more popular.
Is crazy popular, man. It's hard to say it rivals. No, it's true. I would say it rivals Japan. Every arcade that's like a bigger arcade has EX Versus, and the arcades that don't have EX Versus have the older version, which is like Rango versus ZAF 2. There's kind of a replacement for arcades because they've been shut down. So what's actually happening in Hong Kong, and I was invited to one of these last time I was there, people actually have like Gundam houses set up, and what they'll do is a bunch of people will pitch in to like split a flat together, like the price of one very small studio apartment. They will set it up so people can go there, and there's 4 PS4s there, and it's a setup so people can just hop on and play Gundam, like with their friends. And the one I was invited to is not the only one. This is a thing that's pretty common in Hong Kong in terms of esports in general. Trying to play the game is difficult because you have 2 options. The second option is as of last week. You can pay a pretty expensive amount. It's like $25 an hour right now, 25 US an hour or something. It's pretty expensive because they had to kind of have a monopoly on to go to one location to play the game. Or your other option until then was fly to Japan and play it there. So what happened was Bandai used to support EX Versus in other regions. I think starting with Maxi Boost, which is actually the older version, I think it must have been at least 8 years ago. That the version that was out then was like the first time I think they brought the game EX Versus to Hong Kong. I'm not really sure they had full boost or vanilla. They might have, to be honest. But after Maxi Boost on stopped being supported, people were like, well, we're excited for EX Versus 2 to come to Hong Kong, right? And Thailand and other places. But unfortunately, Bandai just dropped international support. As a result, like EX Versus 2 only became accessible through like trips to Japan. But a lot of players still did that. Some of my friends in Hong Kong like planned group travel to Japan from Hong Kong specifically to play EX Versus, and if they do other stuff, that's also a bonus, right? Nobody has the legit version. Nobody has it. There was a huge movement because people were securing like the BNA1, which is like the physical hardware from the machines, it was a huge effort in Hong Kong to hack it. Like people were like really like outsourcing to hackers like all over the world, and like I was asked like, hey, do you have any connections? Do you know anyone? And it was really crazy. I like met this guy who was like a hacker. Apparently they got it as far as they reverse engineered through the Bandai Namco like hardware, and they could get through the like boot sequence, but they couldn't get it to actually launch. And they were like really serious. I was like, whoa. These guys really want to play EX versus 2, man.
Since Bandai Namco has completely cut support for Southeast Asia and the surrounding regions, it's hard for most people to play the game. However, where there's a will, there's a way.
EX versus is always online, so it's very difficult to actually spoof a connection and be able to use it because their system is very, very involved. That being said, and this is a little shady, people in China do have EX versus 2. They have the real machines. Like it's 14,422 US for one set. You need all 4 machines and then the monitor. So it's quite expensive. It's actually so bad. A lot of Hong Kong players play the mobile version now, and actually the mobile version is very popular. It's called the EX versus Battle Arena or something. It's very popular in Hong Kong right now. It's developed by Bandai Namco Shanghai, and it's a gacha game. It's a pay-to-win gacha game, and people in Hong Kong are so starved for EX versus. They're so desperate for EX versus that people are pivoting to this game.
Will Bandai Namco ever port the game or even support it in arcades in the rest of Asia? They've done it before, and the fan base and the money are there.
Okay, it literally feels like in the arcades where there used to be Gundam, the arcade is like missing something.
Recently, as of March, on the Chinese website Bilibili, it was discovered that people were playing a PC emulated version of X vs 2. Up until now, Gundam Vs had been a well-guarded secret, and emulation of any kind just didn't exist. However, this emulation is definitely in a legal gray zone. Providing a ROM or copy of X vs 2 is theoretically impossible, at least legally. Despite the popularity of the game in Japan and Asia, one region in particular doesn't cherish the game as much as Asia, North America. With arcades falling completely out of fashion in North America, it's no surprise why Bandai Namco has held off on launching the newest cabinets in North America. I mean, it's way more logical for them to target home consoles or the PC market, right? Well, no. For some reason, Bandai Namco doesn't want to release the newest version, EX vs 2, on consoles or PC. In fact, only as recently as 2020 did they port Maxi Boost on to PS4, a game that came out in 2016. Not only did they port a 4-year-old game, but they also gave the game zero marketing, so hardly anyone knew it came out.
Every time a new version comes out, it's definitely a bittersweet feeling being over in North America, knowing that while it's really exciting there's a new version, you're probably not going to play it for a couple years. And there's generally been kind of a pattern in console releases where a new version will come out, every 2 or 3 years. The console port for the previous version will get released. That trend seems to be continuing. We are definitely at the cusp of a new version release, so it is difficult to say where we're going to be at in terms of console. With Extreme vs 2 Overboost being announced, a lot of people are thinking that we're going to get Extreme vs 2 Cross Boost as a new console port. While there has been a bit of a cycle with console releases, there's not that much data, so I think it's still kind of a who knows situation, but most of us, I think, are not expecting to be able to play Extreme versus Overboost for quite some time, and that is a bit frustrating. One of the best ways to get better at the game is definitely to watch footage, and it's tough knowing that you're watching footage of a game you definitely can't play yet. But that being said, the game is definitely great no matter what version you're playing. I think a lot of us at least are happy with the versions we do get. Maxi Boost On in particular is really considered a really good legacy version of the game. I think one of the best in hindsight. So at the very least, the North American players are pretty happy with this version, but we are definitely all hankering for some amount of Extreme vs 2, which has really shaken the game up a bit.
Thankfully, there's a dedicated group of players in North America who love Maxi Boost On, and even compete in tournaments. The game has been at Frosty Faustings, Slashback, and even featured as a side event at EVO. For North Americans, Maxi Boost On is the definitive Gundam game.
Online scene started with Maxi Boost On has definitely gotten a bit healthier, and we've been able to run online tournaments with success as well, especially over the pandemic. It is definitely a game where its popularity in Japan and its popularity in America have just the hugest dichotomy, probably more so than almost any fighting game I can think of. We definitely feel this desire to grow the game because we know how good it is, we know how popular it is in Japan, and for us, I think it's really only a matter of time as the game keeps picking up steam. But the challenges with both running tournaments and keeping up with console cycles has definitely been a bit of a hurdle for the community.
I'm torn because at one hand I want arcades to survive, and on the other hand I'm like, that's still really dumb. And I think that there's a lot of potential where if they just released everything on console, or even also maybe released it on PC, I think that this game would have the potential for a huge market. Despite the fact that like it can get really, really like difficult at higher level, if you go up to a cab or you pick up a pad and you just start hitting buttons, you have what I like to call the Tekken effect, where your character just starts doing stuff. It looks really cool. You get the good brain chemicals of seeing cool things, and you're like, wow, I want to play this more. And then maybe you want to go under the hood and learn a little bit more. And like, I think that games like that are absolutely fantastic and can catch on super duper easy. The game has been the #1 arcade game in Japan for years for a reason.
Basically, I think there are a lot of people in Bandai Namco America that realize, hey, Gundam is a really valuable franchise, right? Like, people still love this stuff, and people love, Gundam in general. There's a lot of people who grew up watching Toonami and things like that. So, the potential is here to really grow Gundam.
The choice to not port the newest version of EX vs. 2 is unfortunately very obvious. If they port the game and don't release it globally, they simply wouldn't make as much money in Japan as they do in arcades.
I think it's a pretty obvious why we don't have console ports that line up right to the arcade releases. It's really just money from the Bandai Namco Japan perspective. Gundam is extremely profitable. It's probably one of the most profitable arcade games for, again, the competitive genre. Compared to fighting games, I think Gundam is extremely profitable. You just burn money playing that game, and people are somehow happy to do it. I have no idea how people just throw money that fast, but they are really willing to do it. So, you have a huge player base playing on a credit system in Japan. Console ports just, I think, don't really rack in as much dough. So, in my opinion, and maybe this is a bit rude to say, I do feel like part of it really is just greed, but very understandably so. I mean, the game is it's doing fine the way it is if you just look at it from the Japan perspective, right? Like, they do have a healthy tournament scene, and they're playing on the most recent hardware, and the arcade scene is very healthy, pop-in, and profitable. So from their perspective, I think they ask themselves why they would need to release concurrent console ports that may take away active arcade players is probably their thinking. Now, obviously, like, I'm not representing their thoughts. This is just speculation.
I think even if we get EX vs. 2 console release, people will still play Emblem. Like, not entirely, but there will be people who still play Emblem, because in many people's opinion, EX vs. 2 is fun, but Emblem is like the beautiful game. Because the balance is very good. In EX vs. 2, the power creep is really crazy.
So is Gundam EX vs. worth picking up? Well, maybe if you don't pay full price for the game on the PS Store. More often than not, you can get it on sale for less than $20. With decent netcode and many Gundam to choose from, it's not hard to see why North Americans love this game.
Anybody who's interested in Extreme Versus in Gundam should definitely give it a shot, because it is a really rewarding game to play. And once you play it, you'll realize there is really nothing like it. And that is something that only Gundam has. And the best way, honestly, is to buy the game, find the general public discords for the game, get in there, talk to people, find lobbies, and just play. I mean, you don't need to get into the discords if you don't want to. You can just buy the game, boot it up, and at most standard hours, you'll find someone with a lobby up. Having people to kind of help you and team with you that and not just, feel like you're by yourself, that's a big aspect of the game. Honestly, I think if you can find a friend to play this game with, that is like the best, because then you guys can grow together. You can find stuff on YouTube. You can find written guides as well. If you go to any of the major discords for Extreme Versus, there will definitely be sections where you can find lots of resources. I've written my own resources. People have created guides and things like that. So there's a lots of different ways to find your resources for learning the game.
Netcode doesn't really affect the game that much as it would a game like Guilty Gear or like Blaze Blue. If you think this game looks interesting to you, or you have a thing for anime or pretty boys or girls or giant robots, there's no excuse. Hop on it. It's such a fun and unique game, and there is nothing else like it.
If you're interested in playing Mobile Suit Gundam X vs. Maxi Boost On, check out the official Discord linked below. In addition to finding people to play with, you'll also find community-made guides for different suits and beginner's tutorials of how to play the game. This video is made possible thanks to our wonderful patrons. Massive thank you to everyone on this list, and shout out to B, Cloud, Kiostick, Shampoo, Spartacus, and Yashichi for being Platinum supporters, and an extra special shout out to Marco and Steph for being our Diamond supporters. Thank you so much. If you want to talk to us, check out our Discord. If you want to support our channel and get info on unreleased videos, check out our Patreon. If you want to help us out in a different way, leaving a like, subscribing, and hitting the bell to stay up to date is also appreciated. My name is Jonah. Thanks for watching.